I'm thrilled to be able to be involved with ministry where I sit at the crossroads of history, philosophy, literature, theology. I love all those things, and I'm not so much of a knucklehead that I don't appreciate science and mathematics. I'm not good at it, but it all fits in there. And I love history, and I love history because so many stories of history are great illustrations as to what is happening in our world around us. Not all that long ago, during the days of World War II, the longest battle of World War II basically began the same day Germany invaded Poland, September 1st, 1939, and pretty much went through to the end of Victory in Europe Day, which was in May of 1945, and that one single battle was called, does anybody know? The longest single battle of World War II. Lasted all 6 years. The Battle of the Atlantic. So the Battle of the Atlantic was not just one pitched fight, but it was spread out over many years. And the Battle of the Atlantic began in the early days of World War II as the United States and Canada were shipping material aid to England to help her stay afloat because she was among the last combatant European nations to be able to stave off a Nazi invasion, which Hitler wanted and nearly got it had the British Army been destroyed at Dunkirk like he wanted them to be. So we were helping and would not have been drawn into the war at all if not probably for the attack on Pearl Harbor. Well, the Germans did not want that material to reach England. So these long convoys Gremlin. It's devil, isn't it? Is that me? Rubbing on my face. Okay. So these long convoys, miles long, of these slow rolling freighter ships coming from North America, crossing the Atlantic, are easy pickings for German U-boats, Unterseeboots, submarines. They hunted in what they called wolf packs. Coordinated effort to corral these slow-moving, lumbering ships and to sink them. And to this day, there are millions of tons of material entombed in the icy bottoms of the North Atlantic and even in the waters of the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. There are hundreds of thousands of merchant marines, seamen, and soldiers that were making their way that are entombed in these vessels to this day. The convoys were protected by the U.S. Navy, and in particular, a ship called a destroyer. A destroyer is a smallish vessel of war, and destroyers are designed to hunt submarines. That's what they destroy, submarines. Now, in World War II, they had a nickname. They're called Greyhounds because they're fast and gray and sleek. They're called Greyhounds. There's a movie on Apple TV right now called Greyhound. It is based on a book that was entitled The Good Shepherd. It was written by C.S. Forester. He's the same guy that wrote the Horatio Hornblower series. This book was written in the 1960s. And it tells a story of a captain, and in the book, the captain is a very staunch Presbyterian man, born-again Christian, and he sees himself as shepherding these ships across the ocean. And it's interesting, they called the movie Greyhound because The Good Shepherd is already the name of a terrible CIA movie, so they had to give it a different name. But they decided to call it Greyhound, and it stars Tom Hanks. And in the movie, he's Roman Catholic. He's not Presbyterian, but still a believer. And he sees himself as shepherding these ships. And it's interesting, and I'm going to give you a concept I want you to hang on to, gentlemen. Greyhounds, as dogs, have two jobs. Running is not one of them. They have two jobs: protecting sheep and hunting wolves. I want you to hang on to that. They both protect sheep and they hunt wolves. I am asked time and again, what are the forces at play that are hunting the faith of our students? And are they any different than any of us in this room? And there might be a few college students in here, but I can tell most of us are not. Are they any different? Actually, they are not. the mindsets that the average 18-year-old brings with them into college, the things that they face, the hammer and anvil of college life, the anvil being the licentious lifestyle that's available at every college on the planet. Surely you don't mean Bible colleges. Yes, I do. It's just a little harder to find. Every college on the planet has an available licentious lifestyle, and then the hammer blows of the worldviews, and I gave you 3 of them already, destroys lives, and part of it is the mental commitments and the attitudes that the students bring in with them. These are the wolves that are hunting us, and I want to make 3 of them very clear to you today. So this is not going to be an expository message. I hope you're okay with that. I'm talking to you based on my 8 years of experience and over 1,000 students coming through my classroom. I've made it my business to understand, to not just know what they think, but how and why. And the same wolves that are hunting them have not left you alone. They're at periscope depth, and they are trailing you, and they're waiting to take a shot. So, these wolves that are hunting, often we, and particularly students, raise them from birth as puppies. These are the things that they're kind of inculcated with. And as soon as they get to work, as soon as they get to college, as soon as they get a life on their own, the wolves turn ravenous and they want to attack the owner and devour it. You cannot domesticate a wolf. So we're going to identify these wolves, and I'm going to tell you right up front what they are. There are 3 of them. And we're going to look at them in terms of deficiencies or things that we don't have. So it's a bit of a mixed metaphor, but I'm not an English major, so I don't care. So I'm going to tell you the three deficiencies that all of us need to be aware of. They are no anchor, no boundary, and no book. Now, I do have 3 degrees from a Baptist institution. I could have alliterated that if I wanted to. I could have been no ballast, no boundary, no book. I could have, but I chose not to, and ballast and anchor, #philosopher probs, are not the same thing. So, no anchor, no boundary, no book. Now, I'm going to warn you up front that the first 2 are going to be pretty intuitive. Once I start explaining it, you're going to see how no anchor, no boundary go together. When we get to no book, however, I'm also going to forewarn you, you may get a little angry with me. And I'm willing to risk that, and it's okay. And if it cheeses you off enough to make a decision, good. So be it. I can do that. Now, it probably means I'll never see any missionary support from you. Okay, well, that hurts. But it's about the mission overall anyway, not about me. Amen? Okay, so if I can motivate you by making you mad, good. So this wolf idea, this is nothing new. This has been around for a long time. So I saw some woots and some fist pumps when I mentioned the book Beowulf. You may have been forced to read that in high school, as was I. And when I was 15 or 16, I thought it was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard of in my life. And it wasn't until I got older and I started thinking about it and I started realizing, no, this is a great story. You get like monsters' arms ripped off and everything. I mean, this is great. And it's really interesting in this book because the hero Beowulf is this man who is asked by the Danes to come help them. Because there's this king Hrothgar in his great hall, his great mead hall, and by the way, mead is booze, I'm sorry, but that's what they drank. In his great mead hall that used to be this wonderful place where the bard would come and sing the stories and remind the Shield Danes, the warriors, of the great people that they are, where they came from and what they're going to be, but that has been turned into misery because the night is now stalked by this monster who is dragging off Hrothgar's men, devouring them, and they need help. And in the opening pages of the book, the narrator, the writer, we don't know who wrote the book, says a few interesting things. So I want you just to listen to a few lines from the opening of Beowulf. Here's what he says. Long was the while the dear Lord, Hrothgar, endured anguish and every woe and sorrow deep. Truce, he, Grendel, the monster, would not have with any man, nor would withhold his deadly cruelty, nor accept terms of payment. The fierce killer pursued them still, both knights and young, a dark shadow of death lurking, lying in wait, men not know whither, sorcerers of hell, and their wanderings roam. What does this tell us about Grendel? He's not interested in seeking truce. There is no peace. There is no coming to the table and coming to an arrangement. His goal is destruction and will stop at nothing. Battles only end when one enemy is completely unable to fight any longer or is utterly destroyed. At times, they, the Danes, vowed sacrifices to idols in their heathen tabernacles, and prayers implored the slayer of souls to afford them help against their sufferings of the people. What does that mean? What the narrator is saying, and you find out in the book that these were people who at one time feared God, but it's now gone. He's saying they're praying to and asking for help from the thing that is destroying them. They were mindful in their hearts of hell, but they knew not the Creator, the judge of deeds, nor had heard of the Lord God, nor verily had learned to praise the guardian of the heavens and the King of glory. Woe shall be to him that through fiendish malice shall thrust down his soul into the fire's embrace, to look for no comfort and no wise to change his lot. Blessed shall be he that may after his death day go unto the Lord and seek peace in the bosom of the Father. It's one or the other. This is brilliant. It is one or the other. I see it with my students, and I see it with men and women and young people in our churches. This fiendish malice of going back to the thing that's actually going to destroy us and think that's going to save us. That is one of the enemy's greatest victories. To actually make us think that the object of our salvation is the thing that's actually going to destroy us, and he knows it. He's not interested in peace. He's not interested in truce. He's not interested in coming to the table and coming to terms with you. There will be a winner and there will be a loser. End of story. There's no draw. So, these deficiencies, what do I mean? No anchor, no boundary, no book. Well, what I mean by no anchor can really best be illustrated with what I've heard many a time at a public school high school graduation. Anybody been to a public high school graduation? Okay, then you've heard the speech that I'm about to give. It usually doesn't come from the valedictorian. Their speeches are usually pretty good because they're addressing their peers and they don't say stupid things very often. Very often. It's the knucklehead special speaker that they bring in. And they say something like this. You tell me if you've heard this before. Graduates, as you get ready to cross this platform for the last time and step off into reality to make your mark in history. Okay, now I kind of smirk at that. Let's put a pause there for a second. I kind of smirk at that because, let's be honest, what 18-year-old is thinking about leaving their mark in history at that moment? On that sultry June afternoon? Oh, no, friends. Here's what they're thinking. Where is the after party? And how do I sneak home when that's all over? That's their big plan for the day, right? Okay, but it's altruistic, and I appreciate it. You know, we're encouraging them. It's the next part that drives me insane, and I can barely contain myself, and I've even heard, quite literally, I'm not making this up, versions of this at Christian high school graduations because people parrot what they hear, and they don't stop and think. And they say something really fundamentally stupid, like, and as you go out into the world to make your mark, do not let anyone tell you what you can or cannot. Oh, you've heard this speech. You've heard this? For you are the master of your own destiny. You are the captain of your own fate. You must learn from your own. What horrible advice is that? How am I supposed to learn from my mistakes when I don't know what the standard is? Now, if they really mean, like, you make a mistake and you're wise enough to say, ooh, I shouldn't do that again, great! Don't. But when I say no anchor, I mean there is no foundation. There is no basis. There's nothing at the bottom of the chain holding them down. Because particularly when it comes to the average college student and men in this room. And I'm not saying I'm angry with you. I'm not mad at you. I'm not talking down to you. I'm telling you the way it is because you've been inculcated from birth, some of you, to think this way, that you are the center of your own universe. Some of you are raising children right now and you're pulling your hair out, right? Trying to figure out what's going on because you remember as kids, and how many proud Gen Xers do we have in the room? Okay, thank you. You are recognized. Okay, so I graduated from high school in 1990. I am truly a product of the 80s, which explains things. So, I remember my parents telling me, you may not X, Y, and Z because they're wrong. And I'd say, okay, they're wrong. How many of you are actually pulling your hair out now because somewhere the kids are absorbing this from every corner of the planet where they are, from television to movies to radio to everything, for teachers in school, they're coming back to you and they're not dealing with the sin issue, but they're complaining that you're actually trying to change who and what they are. Some of you are dealing with that frustration with your children right now. It's no longer about this is good godly behavior versus this is not good godly behavior. It's, well, this is who I am and you're trying to actually change what I want to be. Yep. I know, and I'm being trite with it, but I'm trying to help you understand, where does that come from? Well, if there's no anchor outside of the self, that's what all you have left with, because you are your own anchor. I tell my students all the time, okay, I already gave you a piece of it. You do have the right to believe what you want, and I honestly believe that. I'm not just saying it. You really do have the right to believe what you want. Jesus believed that, but he also understood there are consequences for belief. Right? He didn't make people believe in him. If you're not sure, pick a gospel and read it, and I think you'll come to the same conclusion. But I tell my students that you have the right to believe what you want, but the responsible thinking person is going to regularly climb down the chain of their beliefs to see to whom or to what it is anchored. The anchor of my beliefs looks strangely like a Roman cross rammed into blood-soaked ground in a garbage heap outside of Jerusalem. What about you? What is the anchor of what you believe? Is there a standard? The world will say that there is no standard. We just went over this in my ethics class. There's actually an ethical position called ethical egoism. So you know what the word ego means, right? The self, the person. So ethical egoism doesn't mean everybody's egotistical. That's a different idea. But ethical egoism says that the best thing to do is the thing that each individual thinks is right. This is standard operating procedure, is it not, in the world? However, I will throw a challenge to you that I throw out to people who claim this, and we talked about this in my ethics class just last week. I said there's no way anybody on the planet would dare consistently live like that. You know why? Because as soon as your sense of justice is violated, you're going to let the other person know. Let me give you an illustration. Do not do as I do, do as I say. So don't follow the example I'm about to tell you. This is a bad idea. I used to attend a philosophy discussion group in Scranton once a month. I stopped going because at some point, wisdom says you brush off the dust and move on, right? Okay, well, that was this. I didn't give up, but I went for months, and no matter what it was we discussed, the conclusion every time was, and that's why Christians are the stupidest people on the planet. Every time. I'm like, I don't think so. And I'm trying to offer counter arguments, and I just couldn't get anywhere. And they would democratically decide what they're going to discuss. A hat literally got passed around. People put ideas in the hat, and then we vote on them. So one of the last times I went, it was this idea of where does morality come from? And the thing they wanted to talk about is that we don't need God, an anchor, in order to have justice, right and wrong. So they're arguing for this ethical egoism, and I'm saying the only way good exists is if there is an ultimate good standard. I mean, this is kind of logical, isn't it? All right, so I don't arbitrarily choose what is good, because that can change tomorrow. But if there's an actual standard, an unchanging, non-deviating standard, well, now I have a place to start, right? Okay. Well, the young woman sitting next to me was very angry about that idea. And she repeated over and over, there ain't no way any God is going to tell her what to do. Because right and wrong is totally up to the individual. This is free. This is liberating. She's pointing at me. You have narrow thinking. You see through a keyhole. I, however, have very broad thinking. I think in multiple different directions at the same time. Actually, you don't. That's impossible, but okay. And I'm trying to figure out, how do I actually get through? And I'm not getting anywhere. And then I look down, and I notice her right foot is about 18 inches from my left foot. And meanwhile, she's just, bleh, she's really, you ever met like an angry fundamentalist Christian? They're no fun to be around. Well, they exist in the atheist world too. Also not much fun to be around. So I look down, and her purse is between her foot and my foot. It's just a simple leather bag with a banana-shaped zipper across the top. So because I am a Christian, and I do believe that there is a God in heaven and that he hears our prayers, I started uttering a prayer. And it was this: oh God, let her see me before this goes too far. That was my prayer. So then I reached down slowly, deliberately, and I pulled her purse over in front of me, and very, very slowly I started unzipping it, one set of teeth at a time. Now, men, I mentioned like touching a purse, and some of you just broke out into hives. Right? You would never touch another woman's purse, would you? No, and some of us, like, it doesn't take long for us to get ready, so we're downstairs waiting, because we're waiting. That's what we do, till death do us part. We're waiting, and the call comes down, honey, can you bring me my phone? And the panic sets in. Where is it? Please don't say it. It's in my purse. No! And then you say, something stupid like, where? And then the call comes down, well, it's in the front pocket. Okay, first of all, I don't see arrows. Is there a front and back? And there's only one pocket. So I don't like going in my wife's purse without repelling gear, safety flares, food, because who knows if I'm coming out. So, right? So I'm one set of teeth at a time, and mercifully, I'm 3/4 of an inch in. I just see a dark spot. That's it, right? I can't see anything in there, and she sees me. And I can't give you a direct quote of what she said, so I'm going to have to paraphrase. But she wanted to know what in the world I thought I was doing. I said, I'm going through your purse. Cheesy philosopher's grin. I'm going through your purse. She said, you can't do that. I said, well, sure I can. Well, you can't. We're a couple 2-year-olds. She's like, you can't do that. I said, yeah, but why not? She said, because it's wrong. I'm like, yeah, but you say it's wrong. I say it's right. You've been sitting here for an hour arguing that right and wrong is totally up to the individual. You say it's wrong to go through your purse. I say it's right. I'm going through your purse. And she said, yeah, but you can't do that again. And I said, why? And then she said, because everyone knows that, and slapped her hand over her mouth and stopped talking. Because it wasn't quite to the nth degree that I would hope, but guess what she just declared? A standard. Oh. Because your sense of justice has been violated, suddenly there's a standard, isn't there? Zip, back to you. But you go to movies and themes and that you see over and over and over again. And the theme that comes up all the time is that the hero is the hero, not because they're submitting to a standard outside of them, but because they're creating one inside of them. Every time. Have you ever seen a Disney movie? Nearly every single time. There are books that have been written really quickly. I'll tell you one, a book published in 1945. If anybody's ever heard of this book, read this book, I will be amazed. And if I have a t-shirt in your size, I will give it to you if you can prove to me that you've read this book. It's called Mount Analog by a guy named René Dumont. It's the weirdest thing, and I'm not recommending it. Like some books I'd say I recommend. I mean, if you want to feel like weird and French and avant-garde, have at it. But this guy, René Dumont, was writing this book, the book literally ends mid-sentence. Not on purpose, not some like weird French thing, but because he died before he could finish writing the book. He died of tuberculosis. Now, how did he get tuberculosis? Because as a kid, he huffed chemicals and destroyed his bronchioles and lungs. Why did he huff chemicals? Because as a kid in early 20th century France, René Dumont gave up on God and tried to have a connection with the divine through any means possible except God. And in this book, it's a story about this guy who wants to go find this mountain that may exist, that's like in the secret place, and once you ascend it, you can have your feet on the earth and you can reach up and touch the divine. And so he writes a think piece for kind of the French equivalent of National Geographic magazine, just saying, all religions, all major religions of the world have mountain motifs because important things happen on them. Think about it. Are there any important mountains in the Bible? By the way, if you're looking for like a Bible study idea, mountains. And then when you're done with that, trees. Just saying. Okay, anyway. So back to Dumont. So he says they all have one, and even cultures in the world that don't have mountains build them. Like the ziggurats or the pyramids. He's onto something here, right? So he gets this letter back from a guy. His name is Father Sogel. Now, if you could see it, some of you who are good with words and word games would notice that is logos backwards. That's not an accident. That's on purpose. So Father Sogel says, well, I actually think this place exists, and I'm going to put an expedition together to go find it. But he makes statements like, I have looked into all kinds of religious ideas, and I can never say yes or no because I have no touchstone. A touchstone is an ancient tool used to find out if something that looks like gold is actually gold. It is a standard bearer. And so Father Sogel says, I don't have it. And all throughout this book, over and over, the theme is authentic journey. You create the journey. You follow it. It's up to you to follow the path of another. Once we find this mountain, which we have to find accidentally, by the way, once we find it, other people have gotten here before us, and once they get there, they find ships along the shore from all across time. So there have been many who have come before them that have climbed this mountain and said, but you cannot follow the path of anyone else because that is inauthentic. You must do it yourself. Does this sound like a world that you know anything about? As opposed to Jesus saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father but by me. Follow me. I will take you home. Well, obviously, if there is no anchor, then there's no reason to have a boundary. Right? So in my world, now, I'll be very honest with you. Sometimes people think because I work with college students, I'm like corralling some kind of horrible combination of drunken Viking and Tasmanian devil. Now, on the weekends, and the St. Patrick's Day Parade is coming up here in Scranton, that's a wild time. That's actually going to be next Saturday, and I'll just give you an idea. The university plans spring break around St. Patrick's Day because they don't want anybody there. It still looks like a war zone, despite their best efforts. But my students are very respectful to me. They go out of their way to be kind to me. Maybe part of it is because of how I handle myself, but they are what you would call good kids, right? That's what I see. I like them. I like to be around most of them. But these are the kids that become great experimenters in college. Or Scott talked about, he's dealing with some counseling situations. That's this. It's a boundaryless experience because ultimately, what is the anchor? But this is where students will, if it can be inhaled, ingested, or injected, they may try it. This is where people decide on a daily basis things along the lines of sexual identity. The decision can be made, who do I go to bed as versus who do I go to bed with, and those things don't have to line up and can change daily. Why not? If there is no actual standard, then we're back to this idea of gratuity. I am free to do what I want. One of those existentialist authors in my class, if we ever take that class together, that you will be exposed to is a guy named Fyodor Dostoevsky, famous Russian novelist from the 19th century. And in one of his most, if not his most famous book, The Brothers Karamazov, he has a character say, if there is no God, anything is permissible. He's right. If there is no anchor, necessarily there can be no boundaries. And this leads to destruction. I had a student when I taught at Marywood. We're recording this, right? Okay, but my name's not going to be on it? Good. So I don't teach at Marywood anymore because I'm not Marxist enough for them. And I'm not kidding. So when I taught at Marywood, I had a student in my intro to philosophy class. I could tell just by looking at him, he's a little bit older than other students. His name was Justin, and Justin was like a specimen. He was like jacked. And he was so kind. He was so polite. He wanted to talk to me all the time. And I found out very quickly, Justin's story is that he's a recovering addict. Justin spent time at my house with his fiance and his 5-year-old son, and that guy could put away spaghetti like you wouldn't believe. And we talked about books, and he introduced me to the book Watership Down, which I didn't know was about bunnies. Who knew that from the title? I was a little slow on the uptake there. But, you know, we're talking about stuff like that, and he's making great efforts to get his life turned around. And he's asking me about this other pastor, do I know in town, a guy named Dennis, who actually is now my pastor, a guy I went to seminary with, Dennis D'Augustine. A few years ago, we were visiting a supporting church of ours in the Cleveland area, and Dennis called me. He said, did you hear about Justin? He's gone. Now, if Justin had an understanding of the anchor, would that have prevented this event? Not necessarily. Because people who know better still do things that are destructive, do they not? Okay. So just so we're clear, this is not a silver bullet. I'm explaining to you the root problem. I had another student just a couple years ago. Average student, had to take my philosophy class, but was working hard, doing well. He wanted nothing more than to be a Pennsylvania State Trooper. That was his ultimate goal. And he would go do internships in a city not too far from here, not too far from us in Pennsylvania and Maryland, do internships during the summer. And he had a coveted spot as a student security officer. Now, it's a big deal at the University of Scranton because University Security at Scranton, they are the second largest armed police force in the county after the City of Scranton Police Department. And they look like stormtroopers, and I mean that in the best possible way. I'm like, oh, they have arrest power, they carry weapons, they're not messing around. They're real policemen. As opposed to Marywood, if you threaten them, they might throw their radio at you and give you a terrible pinch. But that's all that's going to happen. So this kid had a girlfriend, they had a terrible breakup, and there was something in her dorm room that he thought he needed, so he used his digital skeleton key to let himself into her room to retrieve whatever this object was. Well, there's footprint records of that. You can't hide that kind of stuff, right? Because it's digital. That act ensured he would never become a Pennsylvania State Trooper. He abused his power. He blew his brains out in his mom's kitchen. I got an email. We all got an email because, University of Scranton is not a huge place, 4,000 students, but it's uncommon for students to die in the school year. It just never happens. So the whole university knows. I went to his funeral, and I'm looking at his mom and dad, and those of you who have served in ministry, whether you get paid for it or not, right? Ministry is ministry. You know that look. And you're just praying, dear God, help me to say something. Gone. Disaster. You all know stories like that, do you not? But if there is no anchor, and we keep telling the world keeps telling us, and we kind of just like, well, that's okay what you believe. No, you need to stand up and probably be a man and say, stop it. Because the thing that you're saying that works for all of us doesn't work at all. There either is a standard or there is not. And some of you in this room need to be willing to pay the price to say that. Instead of capitulating every moment, every chance that we get, like the church generally has been for the past 50 years. Here we are. So it's not too weird to think no anchor, no boundary, right? Okay, you ready to get angry? Okay. Smell that? Tar. I can hear the chickens being plucked. No book. What do I mean by no book? I mean, we are seeing generations, and they are in our churches, and they're coming up through our colleges, of people who are functionally illiterate. Now, clearly, I don't mean people who cannot read. Because in order to get into the I would have never been accepted at the University of Scranton. I was a complete knucklehead in high school. I can't believe Carol Snyder was my friend. She was really smart, and I'm stupid. And so, I literally graduated near the bottom of the class. When I worked at BBC, I went and pulled my own file. I wasn't supposed to do that, but I did anyway. And I'm reading what my teacher said about me. I'm like, well, that's harsh, but also true, right? So I don't mean, I know how to read. And kids that go to the University of Scranton, they have to score very high on standardized exams in order to get in there. So that's not what I mean. But I mean, they don't understand how to read a book. What I'm about to say, you may have heard before. If not, I hope you can do something with it. Many people see books as something to be mined for data. Not some narrative to connect with. Do you know what book that happens to sometimes? This one. Now, I know the pastor of this church, so I know it does not happen here, but you know as well as I do, in many other churches, the way that sermons or teaching of Scripture is approached, that pieces are pulled out and set down, favorite ones, pet ones, and rarely what happens is that what we don't get taught is the whole meta-narrative or the whole picture. We look at little tiny individual trees, but we never step back and look at the whole forest, which is a narrative composed over 1,400 years by 40 different authors on 3 continents. And it's one story. That's pretty incredible. So, a reasonable person would be saying, okay, Mr. Professor, how'd you figure this one out? I'm so glad you asked. I will tell you. So in my intro to philosophy or ethics class, we always kind of start off with some of the literature of the Greek philosopher Plato. Plato and another guy named Xenophon are our only 2 sources, for all intents and purposes, for Socrates. Socrates, like Jesus, had students, had followers. Socrates, like Jesus, was executed by the state. Socrates, like Jesus, everything we know about him was written down by his students. So there are some comparisons, and there are some obvious contrasts as well. So there's some comparisons. So there are 4 classic texts that deal with the accusation and execution of the Greek philosopher Socrates. And one of them is called the Apology, or the defense of Socrates. And apology comes from the Greek word apologia, which means defense. He's not saying he's sorry. So at his capital trial, he is giving his defense in front of a jury of his peers of 500 Athenians. This is one of the reasons true democracies never work, right? So don't be like my students. If I were to ask you, what kind of government does the United States have? The answer is not democracy. It's not. You don't want that. Because in a democracy, you know who always gets their way? The people. You don't want that. Anyway, I read that, and it's short. You can read it in one sitting very easily, and it's of ancient text. It's very easy to understand. So I read that, and I'm reading Socrates' defense, and do you know what? Every time I'm rooting for Socrates. Every time. Because it's unjust. And spoiler alert, he's not exonerated ever. He's sentenced to death every time. So the way it works in my class is that my students are supposed to read something, and then they come to class, and I'm supposed to ask them, what do you think, and have a discussion about it. If you're wondering, does that work? It's okay. I mean, I haven't figured out how to do anything. I'm too lazy to give them a quiz, because that means I have to grade it. So I don't want to do that. So I'm trying to figure out how to get him to read it. And I ask him, what do you think? And a few years ago, I'm asking him this, and I was shocked when students started raising their hand, and they started saying, yeah, he probably got what he deserved. What? I'd never heard this before. Now, you could make that argument, say, if this story was taking place in North Korea. People get executed for asking too many questions in North Korea, right? Nobody gets executed for asking too many questions in a free Western democracy that proclaims itself to be this great, free, liberal place where all ideas get to be examined. How do you get executed for asking too many questions? And what do you mean he deserved it? That would be like anybody, I don't care if you're a Christian or not, reading any one of the 4 gospel accounts of the crucifixion of Jesus, closing it and saying, I think that Jesus guy probably deserved to be crucified. That seems nuts to you, right? Now, theologically, we understand the necessity of the whole thing. I get that, the whole justification thing. I understand it. Right? But from a story level, like if you don't understand the theology, to read that and say, I don't understand why they would crucify this guy. And I thought, okay, this is a one-off. But it kept happening. And it doesn't happen with every student every time. I'm happy to tell you that they don't all do this, but they keep happening because they can't see themselves in the story. They don't know how to read a story because they have been reared to see books as something that you mine for data. They have to read their textbook at home for high school, and all the important words are italicized and bolded. All they have to do is find it. There's no work involved, and they just parrot and copy down what they say. Whereas I can read any of these books about the accusation and execution of Socrates, and something inside of me is visceral. It's the same thing I feel. I mentioned the Iliad. I root for Hector. I want Hector to open a king-size can of whoop fanny on Achilles. He doesn't. And by the way, Homer doesn't want me rooting for Hector. He wants me rooting for Achilles, the mama's boy killer jerk. But Hector is like the only guy that seems to have any honor in the whole thing. I'm like, get him! And every time, do you know what happens? He gets killed by Achilles and gets dragged around the city by his heels. It's the same visceral reaction when I take communion. Think about it. We're celebrating life by remembering death of not a good man, but the good man. There's something visceral about that, is there not? Not purely theoretical. It is at the level of my own humanity that I'm celebrating the death of the God man. I am one of those nerds that reads Lord of the Rings once a year. I begin on September 22nd. Why? Because that's Bilbo and Frodo's birthday. Right, Tony? So I read it once a year. I'm also one of those people that thinks our Bibles may have looked different if Lord of the Rings was around at the Council of Nicaea. Just an idea. I'm just saying. I'm kidding. But I read it every year, and there's a character I root for every time. Anybody want to take a guess who it is? Who is it? No? I know I'm supposed to root for Frodo. No, not Frodo. It's not Sam. Gollum. I root for Sméagol. Do you know why? Is he a villain? Is he a villain? He is. Is he a victim? Is he redeemable? So those of you who know the story, he's redeemable at the end. Now, if you've only seen the movies, you wouldn't catch this, but it is in the book. But in the end, spoiler alert, so if you don't want to know, block up your ears because here it comes. So in the end, the ring has been destroyed. Sam and Frodo are plucked off the slopes of Mount Doom by the great eagles. Who sends the eagles to get them? Gandalf. How many eagles does Gandalf send? He doesn't know how many will be redeemed, but he knows 3 might be. Always send the 3rd eagle. My kids, a number of years ago, my son particularly, Sean, he was 10, he was 9 at the time, said, "Dad, I want to watch The Lord of the Rings." Well, because we parent in what we like to call the right way, I said, well, you can watch it after you read it. And my kids are good readers. They'd already read The Hobbit. They are way better readers than I ever was at that age. I thought reading was like some kind of purgatorial hell, when I was in my preteens. And if you're reading like philosophers like Immanuel Kant, it still is, but that's beside the point. So I said, all right, you read it. You read it, Sean. And again, there's a spoiler coming with this. And then your sister's going to read it. And once she gets caught up, then we can enjoy the movies and we can talk about the similarities and differences. And he said, okay, great. I said, it's not a race. Mustn't be too hasty. Take your time. Read it. You can read other things along the way, but you're talking 1,000 pages. And that's kind of tough sledding for a 10-year-old. But I'm sure you can do it. And I said, John, I will tell you what. I will tell you my favorite chapter in every volume. There are 3 volumes. I'll tell you my favorite chapter in every volume as long as you promise me you won't read ahead. And then when you get there, you let me know. And then you and I can go out and have a burger and have something to talk about. He's like, okay, great, Dad. I'm ready to go. He's got the book in his hands. Tell me your favorite chapter in the Fellowship of the Ring. I said, okay, it's called The Bridge of Khazad-dûm. He said, oh, that sounds a little menacing, a little scary. Well, we'll find out. I forgot all about it. Months go by. It is a hot Saturday morning in the summer. I'm the last one up. I'm coming downstairs, and I don't get off the last landing of our stairs because they're blocking my path as a very upset 10-year-old who's obviously been crying. His eyes are red. He's got the quiver lip. His face is all blotchy. He's got snot in his nose. He says, Dad, Gandalf dies? You've just read The Bridge of Khazad-dûm. Yes? What? I said, hang on a second. So I wasn't going for Dad of the Year award. I had to get some caffeine to my central nervous system. Can I get a witness? Okay, thank you. I see that hand. You're recognized. Right, before we had that conversation, so I'm like, okay. So I go get a cup of coffee. All right, Sean, let's go out and sit on our front porch and talk about it. So we sit down on the swing. I said, hey, just a couple minutes ago, when you were telling me about Gandalf, were you crying? Now, my son is not a tough guy. He doesn't try to be a tough guy. He doesn't know he's the biggest kid on the floor playing basketball, like that kind of kid. He just doesn't know. I'm like, house those kids. He just doesn't know. So he's crying, but he doesn't want to cry in front of his dad, and he's embarrassed. He's like, yeah, I was crying. I said, well, Sean, I'm really proud of you. What? Dad, I'm crying about a made-up wizard and a make-believe land in a story that isn't real. Well, you're telling me, like I'm the guy that reads it once a year, and I got to convince myself I'm not reading history. I get it. But let's talk about some things that are real, Sean. How about love, leadership, fellowship, brotherhood, sacrifice? Are these real? They are. I said, exactly. And you see the loss of these things through a death of a character that you connected with, and you're crying because you sense a real loss that is actual. It's fictional, but it's real. And I said to my son, I'm proud of you, Sean, because you have an ability now at 10 years of age that some of your classmates will never have because they're busy leveling up on Fortnite or whatever the heck they do. So you actually can read a book. I have, and like these kids that are in my classroom, it's not too late for them, but it's going to be hard for them to catch up. And if that describes you in this room, there is time. You can get it fixed. A little less football, a little more book. I have, in the past few years, I've discovered a person in history that I have a bit of a man crush on. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but I do. That is Alfred the Great. He's the only king of England that had the title great. What made him great? Alfred reigned from 871 to 899 AD. He's born in 848 AD. So as a young man, he becomes king of Wessex, southern kingdom in England. His older brothers have died in battle. He's sickly, and he is an unlikely king. Alfred comes to the throne after England has been under the knives of the Danes for almost 100 years. So on June 8th, in 793, it's actually the official beginning of the Viking Age. So the Vikings show up in northeastern England. They raid St. Cuthbert's Monastery on Lindisfarne Island. They drown monks, they slay priests. They're there just for the loot and booty. They have no idea what Christianity is, no idea what books are, what written language is. All they're thinking is gold, temples equals gold, and we're sick of going into Central Europe and getting muddy and no money. So this is it. Well, this begins the incursion of the Northmen into the islands of what is now Great Britain, and they begin at the north and they work their way down. And the four kingdoms fall like dominoes: Northumbria, East Anglia, East Anglia, and other kingdoms are falling before them. And Mercia, sorry, that's the third one. And they've all capitulated, they've all fallen. And so they're working their way south and west, and they come to Wessex, and they send emissaries to Alfred. And they said, you know who we are, you know what we will do. Oh, and by the way, they were called sea wolves because sometimes on the masts of their ship they would have ferocious-looking animals. One of them often was wolves. They're called sea wolves. And they said, you know who we are. We will come at you by land and by sea. We will utterly destroy you, or you can pay us tribute, and we'll let you keep your throne and keep your crown, but we will own you. Which do you want? You know what Alfred said? Come and get it. You want it, you come and get it. I will not bow to you. They did. They arrived by sea and by land. Historians call them the Great Pagan Army. Ooh, that doesn't sound very Christian. Well, let's just call it what it is, shall we? So Alfred flees to the marshlands of Wales. Historians believe that Western civilization itself was reduced to 30 square yards of swamp. And some actually suggested that Alfred just give up. He had no one to ask for help. The Irish and the French were both fighting off Danish incursions, and he couldn't ask the Italians or the Spanish for help because they're busy fighting off the Moorish invasions. That's Muslims. He was on his own. So he put out a call, and he said, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to put out a call. And on a certain day, he goes to a place called St. Egbert's Stone, and men from all the other fallen kingdoms start pouring out of the forest. And they said, if you will lead us, we will follow you. And follow him they did. And in a decisive battle in a place called Ethandun, Alfred defeated the great pagan army. And its leader, its Viking leader, actually converted to Christianity, and Alfred became his godfather. Could have had him slain, but became his godfather and changed his name to Athelstan. standing stone in Anglo-Saxon. And so Britain was at peace for a while. Alfred began consolidating what we now know as Great Britain. And he looked around him and he said, well, something needs to be done. Because not only was he a great military leader, he's also a devout Christian and highly educated. And he started translating Latin texts into Anglo-Saxon for his priests. And he looked at his priests. He said, you guys can't even read. And he wrote a preface in a book that he translated. It was a book on pastoral care written in the 5th century. And he translated it into Anglo-Saxon. And he said, look, there was a day when we knew that there was wisdom that lied in our monasteries and libraries, but that's all been destroyed. It's all been touched by fire. They're gone. And there was a day that we knew that there was wisdom in those places. And we want to follow in the ways of those wisdom, but we won't bow the knee to learn what our forefathers learned before us. You won't read. He said to his priests, that changes today. Man, I encourage you, read. You don't have to read what I read. You read something. It engages your mind. And if you want, actually, there's a really good multi-book set called the Saxon Chronicles. It actually tells the story of Alfred. It's historic fiction. It's really quite interesting. For those of you that have Netflix, it's also known as The Last Kingdom on Netflix. Anyway, so what do we do? No anchor, no boundary, no book. These wolves that are hunting us. Well, we come to our halls and we sing the songs and we're encouraged and we learn. We listen to the bards tell the stories of how it was, how it is, and how it is supposed to be. But we don't stay in our halls. So after the last chord has been played, and after it's done ringing in the rafters, what do we do now? May I suggest that we together go visit the armory and suit up. And I draw your attention back to 2 Corinthians 10. Paul writes for the second time, that jacked up group of people in the city of Corinth, and he tells them in 2 Corinthians 10, he says, you live in the world and you are in a fight. But your fight is not like the world's fight. However, you are in a fight and your weapons are not like the world's weapons. Your weapons are divinely forged to tear down the strongholds that set themselves up against the knowledge of God. So let us together, men, go to the armory and suit up. And then we will throw open the doors, we will step into the night and hunt wolves. You heard me. Hunt them. The first time I heard somebody say this, I thought, that doesn't sound very Christian. It is actually very Christian. Because am I talking about people? Of course not. I've also read, the same guy that wrote 2 Corinthians 10 also wrote Ephesians 6. Our fight is not with flesh and blood, but it's against the powers, the principalities, rulers of darkness of this age. Yeah, hunt it. There are ideas, few ideas are value neutral, very, very few. So, what happens in a world of ideas when we let them run rampant? Well, we're going to continue to see casualties over and over and over and over again. Unless we're willing to do a little sword work, step in and do some hunting. Hunt wolves. What do greyhounds do? Protect sheep. Hunt wolves. God, thank you for this time today that we could spend together. For all the work that just went into the few hours that are represented here. God, I pray that you'd make us men of wisdom and valor that would see our world as a place that you have put us in where we can stand for truth, we can stand for you, and we can do so in a winsome and loving way, God, but in a way where we hold our ground. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.